Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. Today, I'm delighted to talk again to Abdullah Al Andalusi. You're most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me on again.
It's delightful to have you back, actually. For those who don't know, Abdullah is an international speaker, thinker, and intellectual activist for Islam and Muslim affairs. He is a researcher for the I3 Institute, an instructor and head of the Department of Occidentology at the Quran Institute, and co-founder of the discussion forum, the Muslim Debate Initiative. He's also host of the website advocateforpalestine.com, which I'll link to in the description below. Do check that out as well. In this episode, we'll be discussing Nigel Farage's controversial comments that significant minorities of Muslims in Britain hold beliefs at odds with British values simply for believing in Islam. Nigel Farage, who is running for MP, Member of Parliament, in the coming elections as head of the Reform Party, has singled out Muslims in Britain for criticism explicitly, expecting Muslims to conform to what many would see as an anachronistic and particular form of recent liberal ideology under the guise of liberal British values, without ever really discussing what those values are or how they are indeed intrinsically British. Farage has since made a public challenge to the Muslim Council of Britain for debate on a platform that hosts his show. That's GB News, a British news channel. I have on today, as I've said, Abdullah, who has debated Nigel twice on his show on GB News on Palestine protests, and has recently been invited on GB News on 2 occasions to discuss the topic of British Muslims and British values, as well as Farage's recent comments. We will, I'm told, be going through some of the polls used on these shows to look at what are claimed to be British values and see some poll results about the views of the wider British public that GB News and Farage decided not to mention, as they don't quite fit their narrative. So expect some surprises, I think. With all of Farage's criticism of the Palestine protests and demands to ban them, we'll also be asking the key question: does Nigel Farage care about the rights of British citizens, or is he really Israel first? So that's my intro. Over to you, Abdullah.
Yes, sir. So thanks again for having me on it. And I wanted to kind of discuss a key issue that's happening now in the UK, because this is not now just a simple episode that occurred on this perhaps rather jingoistic channel, GB News as it's called.
Yeah.
But Nigel Farage is running in the general elections. General elections was called by Rishi Sunak. For those of you who are not in the UK, don't follow UK politics, so it was a rather snap election, quite sudden. And Nigel Farage decided to then run and be head of his Reform Party, and is now trying to position himself as the new opposition. So for those of you who don't know, of course, there are usually 2 main parties in UK politics. You have the ruling party and then the opposition party, on the House of Commons. And for many a decade, it has been the Conservative Party and the Labour Party in opposition, or vice versa, switching between those 2. But now what we're seeing, or at least what many are trying to argue from those who are Nigel Farage's supporters, as well as Nigel Farage himself, is that he is going to, this new party, the Reform Party, is going to position itself as the new opposition, and then in the next election afterwards, they want to take a shot at being the lead or ruling party. And of course, they are well known for being, what you might say, anti-immigration, or putting caps on immigration, as well as arguing for points like, for example, as this show was raised up the GB News, which was Muslim minorities in the UK not assimilating into British values, and so on. So there's a whole host of issues that he's raised, and he's now become actually quite heavily talked about. I don't want to. I mean, I don't know if it would be praised to call him like Donald Trump in terms of notoriety, because Donald Trump was quite
I'm sure he wouldn't like that comparison. He's a big fan of Donald Trump, isn't he, as well?
Oh, yes. But if you'd like, you could say he's the British Donald Trump minus the hair. Boris Johnson more fitted.
Minus the orange complexion as well. Complexion. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Actually, in some photos, you can see something of some orangeness to him. So this is why this is actually a key issue. And I actually didn't know how big it would be until the snap election was called. After a lot of these episodes, which I appeared with Nigel Farage. And so anyway, so for those of you who want context watching this, so there was a rather incendiary show interview with Trevor Phillips and Nigel Farage on Sky News. And this is what set everything off. And in that show, Nigel Farage was discussing the problem in the UK of a certain minority, and Trevor pressed, like, what minority? Oh, you see them every Saturday, because every Saturday there are anti-apartheid, anti-genocide, pro-Palestinian rights marches through London, through many cities in the UK. And then Trevor asked, "Are you referring to who? Like Muslims?"
Yeah.
And Nigel Farage didn't evade. No, I'm referring to no. He said,
yeah. You just said yes, I am.
Yeah. And he basically talked about Muslim youth and the problems that they are not assimilating into British values. They hold certain ideas, and he started to cite roll off just a few statistics that he thought was quite troubling, arguing that a majority of them sympathize with Hamas. And then in another show where he was on GB News on his own program, actually, but being interviewed this time, he argued that one of the biggest concerns is, in fact, the most shocking or the biggest concern for him was that a significant majority of young Muslims believe in the Islamic concept of jihad. And that's it. Not like they believe in jihad against Britain or jihad against Israel or anything like this in particular. No, just the concept of jihad.
Well, just the word, but was a dog whistle, a trigger, which is meant to evoke goodness knows what, which was self-evidently wrong and bad and meant to be rejected if you are British. The lack of critical reflection and nuance and any attempt to actually define what they're talking about really struck me.
Yeah, and this was, I mean, in fact, you could say that GB News, which I think is really a platform that's campaigning for the Reform Party. So yeah. I think it's safe to say that they are the Reform Party's TV channel. Yes. They have been promoting him constantly, and they have been raising this issue of the poll results that were performed by the Henry Jackson Society. And so they raised it all the way back, if I recall, all the way back in April, the 9th of April. And then, of course, over a month later, you see on the 26th of May in Sky News, that was when the infamous interview happened where Trevor Phillips and Nigel Farage. Now, the thing is this, the irony is, and this was actually pointed out by GB News in response to Trevor Phillips's more moderate, if you can call it, responses to Nigel Farage in terms of criticizing the Muslim community, that Trevor Phillips, all the way back in 2016, did a documentary, What Muslims Really Think, where they did a poll of Muslim opinions and beliefs, and he raised what he viewed to be concerns with Muslim opinions and beliefs concerning homosexuality, concerning jihad, concerning the usual gamut of things that they go through.
Oh, can I just check with you? As far as you're aware, did these people do a similar survey about the views of Orthodox Jews and their views on the Torah and homosexuality, or the Torah and capital punishment, or what was that survey done of the Orthodox Jews in, say, London? Well, there's a sizable community in North London.
Strangely, no.
That's so shocking, because the religions are quite similar in a way. The Torah and the Sharia are not that dissimilar in terms of their content and their relationship with, the community and God's law and so on. So it's fascinating that they didn't bother doing that survey. Okay, thank you.
Well, this reminds me of a time, I think it was maybe 2010, the English Defence League, popularist nationalist or demagogic-led organization, led by Tommy Robinson, who basically they brought they brought a rabbi to an American rabbi to the UK who was Islamophobic, and they were kind of using him to speak to maybe show some kind of front against Muslims. Yes. And I believe it was Hashim.
I thought it was Mansour, but anyway, either Mansour or Hashim at Speaker's Corner.
Yes, Mansour, you're correct, yes. And so Mansour, in a sense, cornered him in Speaker's Corner, just spoke to him in Speaker's Corner, asked him some questions, and said, well, what do you believe about this? You know, you hate Muslims, you have all these issues with Muslims, and Muslims aren't assimilating the West there, fifth column, what have you. But what do you believe about people who engage in sodomy? Yeah. And eventually, you know, he wanted to not give his opinion, but I think then he got angry, and then he just started to express what his opinion was, which he said in essence is the death penalty under Jewish law. Yeah. Right. And this was the rabbi that the EDL brought to England from America, strangely, to basically attack Muslims for having quote unquote extremist beliefs and ideas.
I've forgotten about that. It was an absolute classic moment, and the way Mansour deftly interrogated him actually and pressed all the right buttons, and he knew that this rabbi was basically had double standards. He was criticizing Muslims and Sharia law and all this, and yet the Torah itself, of course, is very similar and has similar laws. In fact, have far more capital crimes, all sorts of things than the Sharia does, which is actually quite limited in its. Anyway, that's not the subject, but it's a fantastic bit of theatre, actually.
Well, technically, being rude to your parents is a capital crime in Judaism,
and that's a law that Jesus apparently reaffirms in the Gospel of Matthew. Bizarrely, it's there. People are aware of that. I want to get diverted on the Gospels.
Well, you know, one of the things I found as a big elephant in the room is, for example, a lot of these people will talk about Muslims and women's rights, and Islam doesn't believe in women's rights or negates women's rights, and they'll never ever talk about Jews or Judaism. When I refer to Jews, I mean Jews in the religious sense, not in the ethnic sense.
Yeah, not atheists.
Because an atheist Jew, they don't have no connection to the Torah, because they don't believe in it. So, in Jewish halakha law, there's a established principle that basically a woman cannot get divorced on her own volition. She can't even go to a judge to say I get divorced. The husband must release her from the marriage. If the husband doesn't release her from marriage, she can't move on. She can't get divorced. She will still be married. In Islam, the wife can go to a scholar or a sheikh and make a case, and she can be released. She doesn't have to. She's not kind of a prisoner of her husband. So, but in Judaism, it's called a get, where they have to get a special divorce permission, but from their husband. And in the Jewish community, we're talking about the Orthodox Jewish community. What they try to do to get around that is they just try to pressure or shame the husband to release the wife, because the Jewish law does not allow her to go to be divorced of her own volition. So, but they won't talk about this. Instead, they'll talk about unfair Islamic concepts of marriage. That's what they'll talk about, and they've talked about it. The British government commissioned a study on this, on Muslim marriages and women's rights and so on. Actually, quite a few of them. Which I've engaged on various TV channels in the past. When in the past, where Sky News was the worst that the right wing could get, right? But until GB News came along, GB News just really.
Sky News seems quite moderate and balanced these days compared to GB News.
Yeah, I was going to say raised the bar, but I think lowered the bar is perhaps more correct. So anyway, and I just want to be absolutely clear with everyone watching this. I don't think any aspects of Islam should dare be called extreme, and are not extreme. Extreme is to go outside the bounds of the Creator that He has prescribed for us, and so I never use. But I simply use it against those who themselves decry Muslims for it, to show their inconsistency and the fact that they overlook the beliefs and values that they would deem extreme had they come from Muslims.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you just want to be absolutely clear on this, that there's nothing about Islam that we should be ashamed of. In fact, quite the opposite, that the Creator of the universe gives us wisdom and justice and mercy, and so on. So anyway, that's the position. So I appeared actually in, as I mentioned, 26th of March to discuss these poll results. And it was actually one where they showed a few clips of different Muslim speakers, including Mohammed Hijab, a colleague of mine. And they basically...
Corner. I think it was Speaker's Corner, wasn't it? Yeah.
and they basically misrepresented him. And the episode was about the dangers of the younger generation of Muslims growing up in Britain who have un-British values, and they are ones which are a growing threat, and they're concerned. You know, it's interesting when people talk about concern and threat and the need to do something. They never really talk about what do you mean by do something exactly. like would you like to elaborate? Perhaps put Muslims in an area for education, perhaps with a fence and guard towers.
Concentration camp, perhaps.
Yes,
I think the British invented that. Didn't we invent that in South Africa in the beginning of the 19th century or something?
Yes, it is a great British invention, British values there.
Yes. Let's just praise British values, like concentration camps, then taken over by a certain country in Germany, I think it was. Anyway.
Yes. So for those of you who, because I always try to imagine there are many people in the audience who think, isn't that concentration camp just meant to be a death camp? No, not necessarily. Concentration camp, as the name denotes, is simply you concentrating a population of people that you are subjugating, the civilians, into areas that you can control, or into an encampment you can control. And many Boer civilians died in those camps, not necessarily due to a systematic execution that the British set up, but simply due to the conditions, poor nutrition, disease, and so on and so forth. So actually, thousands of Boer civilians died in British concentration camps. The Libyans used it. The Italians used it in Libya against Libyans, and of course, the Germans used it for Jews. It was initially to get them to make them work camps, for them to do work and so on and so forth. And then they decided as to, we have to liquidate the Jewish population as the war. They're going to lose the war, and they want to remove as many Jews as possible. Even right up to the last minute, they were saying to liquidate. Whereas previously, of course, they were exploiting Jews as slave labor for the German war effort. But prior to the concentration camps, they were trying to kick out as many Jews as possible out of Germany through emigration, leave, and telling them to leave, pushing them to leave, and so on and so forth. And Hitler used to mock. Actually, they said, like, "Oh, no country wants Jews." Many countries are shutting their doors, including America, to Jews trying to seek refuge outside of Germany. And so it was the Jews that couldn't escape, because countries like America and other places didn't limited how many Jews they could take in, and even in fact closed the door to many of them. That led to many Jews not being able to escape Germany, not being able to escape parts of Europe, and then basically just being massacred by the Nazis. So that's not really discussed much these days, about how many of Jews died needlessly because these countries, which call themselves allies to Israel and against anti-Semitism and so on and so forth, they actually let Jews die and actually ignored them purposely. So anyway, so that's just the context. So on this program that I attended, they showed some video clips, and they showed a video clip of Mohammed Hijab, and I knew they took it from a video clip on YouTube that was purposely cut to show and misrepresent Mohammed Hijab's opinion, to say that he believes that the Quran allows you to marry and 5-year-olds, or marry and consummate with 5-year-olds, to be more precise.
Okay.
Whereas, and on that show, I had to, chime in and say, well, I know of this clip you refer to, and I know it's actually cut, because if you just literally watch the full entire video, he's arguing with a hadith rejector. So, for those who don't know, in Islam, our scriptures is the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his actions, what he was silent over, as in what he permitted in his presence. So, and all this is collected in hadith, or the Sunnah. And so there are some people who have adopted levels of skepticism which make them want to reject all the Sunnah and only focus on the Quran, sola scriptura, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And Mohammed Hijab was arguing with this person, saying, look, if you reject the Sunnah, which gives us a lot of very specific conditions and limitations and so on and so forth, then the Quran doesn't give you a very specific age for marriage, consummation, consent, and even talks about people who get divorced who are prepubescent. Now, this is because, as the hadith elaborates, that basically people can get married before the age of consent, but consummation can't happen until they reach mental and physical maturity.
Right? People often forget that. They think being betrothed to someone married, that means you can consummate the marriage. It's not the case until, and the same for the Bible. The biblical norm is puberty, really, usually, actually. It's never before that. Yeah.
So I pointed out on the show, and again, they were like deer in headlights because I don't think they've done their research, or I don't think they even care to do.
I don't think they cared. I didn't get the impression they cared terribly much. Yeah. So then, and that was on in 26th of March where they unveiled this poll, and they told me beforehand, maybe a couple hours before the show, that they were going to talk about this poll, and the poll had just come out, so I was still halfway kind of going through that poll. And so I try to get as many statistics as possible to say, okay, well, what they're going to say, and how they're going to say it. And so I brought some things up during that. But just to give you an idea of how they weaponized this poll, and Henry Jackson Society, for those of you who don't know, is a neoconservative think tank. It was formerly run by Douglas Murray, who infamously said that conditions for Muslims must be made harder across the board in Europe or UK. So he's not necessarily a friend of Islam, you can say, and arguably Muslims too. So they brought up a whole bunch of poll results. This is where I first heard this poll that was conducted by Henry Jackson Society, and there has been some criticisms of this poll, the methodology, the fact that they don't ask the exact same questions to non-Muslim British people as they do to British Muslims. In all the questions, but they brought up things like this just so you guys can hear what was being discussed. So they did say 23% of Muslims. So he said that only 23% of Muslims don't actively want Sharia in the UK. Don't actively want it.
Actively want it, right? Which is kind of weird. Like, why aren't you mentioning how people actually say they want it? Why are you saying, oh, these people don't actually only?
Yeah, well, that means 3/4 do want it. I mean, that's the positive thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And so they'll say things like this. They'll say 52% want it to be illegal to show a picture of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. 57% want halal food to be compulsory in all schools and hospitals. I'm just reading out what they are saying in these polls.
Yeah.
Only 28% are opposed to making homosexuality illegal. Only 20. Yes, so presumably that's not enough people. And then they said 16% of Muslims, only 16% of Muslims would be opposed to a Muslim political party. It's interesting because only, as in, like, Muslims must agree to a set of things that they must be against. Otherwise, if there's not enough of them doing so, then this is bad. Then he said that 46% of British Muslims have more sympathy for Hamas than Israel. And you can probably detect the misleading, way this is cast, because 46% of British Muslims have more sympathy for Hamas than Israel. It's kind of like, if you're choosing between, the devil and was it the blue sea? Yeah. You might say, well, I prefer the blue sea, right? Than the devil, right? You say, oh, I can't believe you prefer, being chucked into an ocean or something.
Well, but we said that many Muslim majority countries do see that organization as a resistance, Palestinian resistance, like the president of Turkey, for example, the state of Qatar, for example. They don't have that negative view. I know in Britain, they do, but there is a plurality of views on this globally. The United Nations has not designated that organization as a terrorist organization. They could do, but they haven't. And I mean, I have to be careful what I say here, because obviously I could be prosecuted. And what I'm trying to say is there's a plurality of views globally on the status and nature and the goodness or badness of that organization. So, Muslims have chosen one view, but there are other views.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, my point was a philosophical point that if you say, well, let's say take this organization, regardless of whether it's good and bad, and you put it up against something that is, I think we could all say objectively far, far worse by the numbers of people they kill, by the amount of time and duration and extent of oppression and denial of rights and freedom of movement that they can exert. That objectively speaking, they're worse. So if the question is, who do you have more sympathy for? You're always going to pick the lesser of two evils, quote unquote, regardless of whether you think this organization is evil or not. But it's a really weird question to ask. It's a very ridiculous question to ask.
Mm-hmm.
But I suppose GB News might argue that people should sympathize with Israel. I suppose that's their point, is that Israel should be sympathized with, even though there are significant proportions of the British non-Muslim population, which I'll go into, that don't sympathize with Israel, and criticize Israel, as rightly should criticize Israel. Then another question, another poll they raised, was only a quarter of British Muslims think that Hamas committed rape and murder on October the 7th. And now this is the thing, is like that there was some disputes as to what was happening on October 7th. I mean, there was the Israeli pundits, military experts, and people in the military of Israel making lies that became exposed later on as actual lies. That, like, objectively, that this was shown to be actually, this is incorrect. There was no beheading babies. I believe there was the only actually baby that had died there was only one baby that died, and it didn't seem to be from any direct bullet. It must have been from a stray round. So there was no direct killing of babies. Decapitation or not decapitation, but certainly we heard at the very beginning 40 beheaded babies was quite popular. And Piers Morgan said 40 dead babies, some of whom are decapitated. He tried to say some of whom decapitated, but that was in the context of everyone was saying 40 decapitated babies. So this was going around. Then it got disproven, despite the fact that people were coming on camera saying, "I've seen it," or "I have a picture of it." Right? At the scene, there's some first responders and others and so on and so forth were actually shown to be lying. Military soldiers asked by journalists saying, "Yeah, I've seen it with my own eyes," and didn't. So the issue is that there's a lot of questions, and of course there was a recent UN report that looked at available evidence for rape on October the 7th, and they haven't found any evidence of rape. Now there might be testimonial evidence, but they have not found any other evidence beyond that, like in terms of forensic, in terms of video evidence, and so on and so forth. And of course Israel is refusing to let forensic examiners come in, impartial third-party examiners come in to do that. Like, if rape happened, then we need to know, and we'll condemn it. Right? There's no dispute upon it.
It's a crime in Sharia law. Obviously, it's a crime in Sharia. Rape is a crime, a very serious one. So, if people are guilty of crimes, they must be called to account. But it seems the UN have not found any evidence of that.
Yes, so far, but also the question, how it was worded, was, do you the question was worded, do you believe that Hamas committed rape and murder? But the thing is, what if you believe they committed murder but not rape, right? So, like, there's no, well, can I just answer one of that or not? So this is the issue about the question, and I don't want to draw too much into it because I didn't actually wasn't able to fully respond to it on the program, because they scattergunned this before I even was actually brought into the interview. They just scattergunned this at the opening of the show, as they say. Here's some statistics. Okay, now over to Abdullah. We have a few questions for you, not related to what they've just said. Right. So it's hard. So I kind of answer all of them, but it's a
debater's trick, isn't it? You overwhelm your opponent with loads and loads and loads of alleged facts, and then you don't have a time to respond to them, and it looks as if you made a really good case. Whereas each of these claims needs to be forensically examined.
Yes. And as I said, I always point to a military analyst called Michael Clark, who is actually consulted by Sky News. He always comes onto Sky News war analysis of what's happening in Ukraine. He's probably regularly. If you've ever seen anything, Sky News analysis of the war in Ukraine, that's the guy they're speaking to, Michael Clark. So he was interviewed about what happened on October the 7th. And he put the point down that Hamas was trying to scupper a normalization deal with Saudi Arabia. They were trying to get hostages to negotiate to rescue Palestinian hostages, things like this. But he then said that Hamas were more successful than they expected. They didn't expect to actually get as far as they did, and they lost control of their operation almost after it started. And he said, and I'm quoting him, and then it turned into a spontaneous terrorist attack as opposed to a planned terrorist attack. So this is what he said. It turned into a spontaneous terrorist attack. So what it seems to be is that a number of fighters, and of those maybe not fitted with Hamas, committed war crimes outside of their orders and directive, as there was no command or control over them. And some documentaries have shown that Hamas expected 90% of them to be dead, within the first 24 hours or so. So they didn't expect to be so successful. It was shocking. It was beyond their ability to control by many political analysts. So then this raises the question that, okay, so when Israeli soldiers are in video committing war crimes, and I've seen quite a number of them. I saw where they shot an old man in his home in Gaza, as they were going into a home. He had no weapons on him. He was actually next to his bed, and he was basically just shot, and they shot him again. There was a number of videos of people walking along are meant to be a pathway near the coast in Gaza, which is meant to be a safe pathway between north and south, just getting shot by Israeli soldiers. No weapons on them, just walking, just getting shot. And it was at a distance, so these soldiers didn't realize they were actually being filmed doing this. There's drone videos of basically people just carrying supplies in a kind of cart. And again, they've no weapons on them, just getting blown up. So there's quite a lot. There's video after video after video of Israelis shooting unarmed Palestinians. The Israeli government will always say it's a mistake, or they'll say it's a war crime done by that particular soldier, but you can't blame us because it wasn't our orders. It wasn't part of our directive. Right. And when videos were released by Israel concerning these captured Hamas fighters, and they were asked the question repeatedly, is it allowable in Islam to kill women and children, target non-combatants? And they all say quite consistently, no, it's not allowed. You can't kill women and children.
Which is true.
Yeah, that is the standard Islamic perspective. And they'll ask, where were you taught this? So they said, well, we were taught this in our mosques, in our religious education institutions, and so on and so forth. And of course, this is in Gaza, and who controls the religious instruction in Gaza, basically, or at least the mosques and what they teach, and certainly the beliefs of all these fighters is going to be presumably Hamas. So this then contrasts and juxtaposes with, you might say, captured ISIS fighters who are asked, do you believe you can kill non-combatants like Shias who in Iraq who were non-combatants that you killed, or but you are killing civilians in non-combatants in the West? And they'll just say, yeah, you're allowed. They'll say it openly. They'll say it without any compunction or any embarrassment. And this then to me is like, well, wait a second here. There's an inconsistency going on, because if you're blaming Hamas for an actual war crimes committed by some of its people going outside their orders and their teachings, and yet you don't blame Israel for the same thing happening when their soldiers commit war crimes, which allegedly you say goes outside the teachings of the Israeli state and so on, and the Israeli rules of engagement, then that's inconsistent, right? So maybe many Muslims are reflecting that perception that, well, we don't think that it was ordered perhaps by Hamas to do so, because the evidence seems to be very strange, because Hamas has not been justifying the killing of non-combatants, and they keep denying that they ordered it. They say, we didn't order any killing of non-combatants. We want to capture hostages. So this is where this question really kind of obfuscates a lot of the details on the ground here, and the very fact that people who are pro-Israel, pro-Israeli government, would always defend the Israeli government no matter what video captures we have of Israeli soldiers shooting people. And they always say, no, this is just one soldier or a bunch of soldiers. Do not blame the Israeli state. So the issue is we need to have consistency on that. But anyway, that was just a point I wanted to make. To blame British Muslims for a very poorly worded question, when clearly everyone has uncovered consistent lies by the Israeli state about what actually happened on October the 7th. And as I said before, when there was a discussion as to what do you think about the ICC putting out an arrest warrant, or calling for the arrest warrant of Israeli leaders, as well as the Hamas leaders. So look, bring all of them to court and get all the evidence out. And if anyone has been guilty of killing, ordering the killing, or allowing the killing with their knowledge of non-combatants, then they should be punished. Anyone and everyone that has ordered the killing of non-combatants should be punished, or has acquiesced to it, knowing it's going to happen, and has not stopped it or restricted it, they should be punished. Whoever it is, whoever's doing it, that's been the policy. But anyway, and then the host, I think it was Patrick Christie, said that based on these polls, he said that Britain is doomed. Britain is frankly doomed unless something changes. And this is, and then he mentioned other points like, Muslims are more said they want to declare Islam a national religion, and they want to, the majority of them want to impose Sharia law. So this has basically been some of the points that was raised up on that show all the way back in March, which I tried to address with some points, which is basically I pointed out a few things. So, well, firstly, British values, like if you're saying that because these poll results, they don't mention actually what the poll results are of the general non-Muslim British public, but presumably if it goes against the majority opinion, and you're presumably you're saying the majority opinion is British values, then the majority opinion of British people polled who are non-Muslim, 56% said that they don't trust British Jews when they talk about the state of Israel and what the actions of the IDF and or IOF, as it probably should be called, do. So then, is it British values now to distrust Jews? Right? Like I could throw back a distorted, twisted, that's what
you did. That's what you did on one of the videos. Actually, you threw it back at them, saying, well, most British people don't trust Israeli leaders, therefore they are anti-Semitic, therefore should we follow the majority in not trusting Jews? So you shifted it subtly, deliberately, from Israelis to Jews, not of any malicious motive on your part, but to simply make a point.
Because that was the question was that the question was, do you trust to non-Muslim British? Do you trust British Jews when they talk about the state of Israel? So the majority said no. So I said that, well, if the majority of people in Britain are the definition of British values, then would you then accept that yourself? I put to them, of course they wouldn't. Yeah. And of course, and it's also a very ridiculous and imprecise question. There are many British Jews who criticize the state of Israel and who bring up facts about Israel, and they should be believed because they bring up facts. Because they are very credible. Their ethnicity or their religion is not the issue here. It's rather the content is what we judge, whether they have evidence, not the person themselves. So this is the point. And I also brought up something that you might find shocking, because you've heard me mention it twice on these shows, and people think, well, where's Abdullah just coming with this from? But no, I checked all the statistics, and I mentioned that if you want to go by these polls show that the British non-Muslim public is twice as likely as Muslims to support ISIS. Mm-hmm. And people think, what? We're like, what are you talking about? Because like ISIS calls themselves an Islamic group. Why would non-Muslims be more likely to support them, or rather have a positive perception of them? But that is indeed the case. And so the question is,
what are the exact percentages? That's the
sure. So it says the question is, do you have a positive or negative view of the following ISIS? So 2% said very positive, and 4% said quite positive from the non-Muslim British public. When asked for Muslims, only 2% said very positive. Still worrying, but it's less than the wider non-Muslim British public. And 1% said quite positive.
Oh, really? Gotcha.
So if you add all that together, so Muslims, of all the Muslim people that were polled, only 3% said they have a positive view of ISIS. Whereas if you go by the non-Muslim British public, 6% said they have a positive view of ISIS. And so this is one of these weird and wacky things that the poll has just brought up. But it's in the poll, right? And again, they didn't respond to me. I think they were deer in headlights. They didn't know what to say, because I think Patrick Christie is the host. I don't think he did the research himself. His researchers probably did it, and they just gave him some headlines to say, and he didn't know anything about what was actually being discussed there. And now on that same show, they brought up a few clips of a Muslim speaker called Dowerman, and again, so with selective quotes, where things like saying, if men and women free mix, Allah destroys the government or the state. Women to stay at home only come out if there's a need. I mean, there's no they didn't quote him fully. They just tried to find these little sound bites to quote of him. And they said, for example, a very weird quote they tried to pluck of him saying, sitting next to a guy who is going to sodomize not a guy that night, and you expect Allah's victory. I think he's referring to something like, if you sit next to someone who commits sodomy, he was maybe was condemning someone for that, perhaps, I'm not sure, because there's no context given to this. So they try to pluck some sound bites to the wider public to show them. Not long of these.
If you had Orthodox Jews talking about the Talmud, for example, there's some very disturbing statements in the Talmud by Western liberal standards as well. So you could easily find some Orthodox rabbis talking about the relevance of the halakha to this situation and that situation, and come up with some. But of course, that's never done, even though it's quite comparable in a way.
Oh yes. I mean, the Nazis would cite Talmudic verses to support their propaganda against Jews, and obviously they did misquote them, quote them out of context, to spin a narrative against Jews in Germany and get everyone to hate Jews. So to address some of the points, as I said, that was raised, for example, that Muslims wanting, if someone asks, do you want Sharia law in the UK? Well, I say, look, you say, do you want me to say I hate Sharia law? I don't want Sharia. I don't believe Sharia law should be applied. And I caveated, I said, look, when Muslims are asked, do you want Sharia? They say, do you want Sharia for Muslims, not for Christians and Jews and Zoroastrians and Hindus and so on and so forth. Sharia is for Muslims. It can't make a non-Muslim a better Muslim, right? The point of Sharia is to help Muslims become better Muslims.
The whole thing, the whole question is, what is Sharia law? It was almost a tautology. It's the Sharia, isn't it? What does it mean? Because if you look at a standard work of Sharia law or Islamic law, like Muwatta by Malik, like 90% of it is to do with prayer. It's to do with inheritance. It's to do with relations between people and business and so on. Only a tiny bit is to do with Hudud punishments, and that's way at the end of the book. So the Sharia does cover how you pray, as I say, or inheritance, or how you treat your neighbors, or how you do wudu, for example. This is Sharia law, but this is never really made clear. It's never really discussed. So what you say by Sharia and what Farage means by Sharia could be completely different things. And you're both using this term as if you're talking to each other about it. But I would suggest you're not. You're actually talking about two different things.
Oh yes, I mean, I even said that they were speaking over me. I even said that I'm practicing Sharia right now. I'm smiling. Right. So this is I'm following Sharia law right now. I mean, I'm applying it right now. Because it's not just because I think they see it as it's just this only political law code, and no, it's for the Muslim. It's comprehensive in terms of it's our ethics, it's our personal ethics, it's our morality. As well as it deals with areas of state law and organizing society, but for a land where Muslims have sovereignty over that. And non-Muslims, even under, as I pointed out in the show, even historically speaking, under Islamic caliphates, non-Muslims were not under Sharia. Jews and Christians had autonomous, wherever they were, their communities were based, they were autonomous, and they had their own law courts. And so on. And in many cases, they'd go to the Islamic law courts because they saw it gave them a better deal, so to speak. There are actually recorded cases of Jews presenting themselves or Christians presenting themselves into an Islamic court for adjudication according to the Quran and Sunnah. So we have these actually documented. Some of the earliest archives written in Greek. That's how early it was, because Muslims, the administrators were Greek in speaking, former Roman administrators. So we have these documented. So these are things. But anyway, this all goes against the narrative of GB News, because what they want to argue is that Muslims want to impose Sharia law on non-Muslims in England and take over this country. And it's like, no. I mean, yeah, we believe that Sharia law is the best system for mankind, but unlike liberalism, which believes that liberalism is universal, such that all human beings must have a right to be under liberalism and therefore must be under liberalism, and whether they like it or not per se. Although there are some disagreements as to what's the best way of spreading liberalism, by the sword, or by encouraging liberal revolutions in tyrannical regimes. But they believe that it is a must for all mankind, whereas for us, it's a must, but because our purpose in life is dependent on the requirement of free will and free choice on the matter, that we can't impose it on those people who don't freely believe in it, because that's intrinsic to the purpose of life of human beings, is they must make a free choice to accept the creator of the universe and to accept Sharia. So unlike liberalism, we don't actually have this very imposing colonial imperative whereby we have to force Christians to stop eating pork and to stop going to churches and so on and so forth, or we have to force Jews to come into mosques and pray in Muslim prayer methodology. No, that doesn't exist. But that's not what the narrative that was trying to be spun by GB News and many jingoistic right-wingers. I want to just kind of take a pause here and just maybe you could say talk about, I think, the elephant in the room, which
elephant is that?
Well, British values themselves. Which is upon which this whole discussion is a base.
A lot of this, before you, I mean, just a pause, just to preface what you were saying, a lot of this discourse, not from yourself, but on GB News and elsewhere, assumes we all understand what we're talking about. So when you mention British values, what you have in mind is exactly the same as what Farage does, ditto Islamic law and all these other concepts, but often misunderstanding because we're not actually talking about the same thing. And often we have wrong ideas about things. So what I don't know, Farage, when he mentions jihad being this terrible, self-evidently terrible thing, well, what does he mean? Can we actually look at what Islam teaches, please? No, we're not going to do that. We're just going to use this word and scare everyone. And that's not a great way of spreading knowledge, really, is it? And education.
Well, I mean, as I said, it's almost like it's saying, well, jihad is an Arabic word, and therefore it's against British values, and we can't use it, despite the fact that his favorite beverage, alcohol, it comes from an Arabic word. But and this is the issue, is that British values, as in what is deemed to be quote unquote mainstream, or the accepted consensus, or the assumed consensus, to be more accurate, has changed radically over time, over decades. Each decade,
and may change again. This is the thing. Yeah. I don't think we reached a terminus there. It could change again in another 10 years. I remember a time when the idea of gay men, two men marrying each other, was absurd. And now it's British values. Where did that come from? So in 10 years' time, it could be a sister and brother, a biological sister and brother marrying each other. Because it's obvious this is a British value. I mean, what absurdities do we have in store for us? Now, that's not a cynical question. We've seen such revolutionary change in our lifetimes. And because liberalism has no metaphysical roots, has no foundation in any transcendent values, it's constantly changing. So I would ask, what's next, really, as well as what's been before.
I mean, yeah, and the irony is, and you've made this point for many years, which is, 100 years ago, just take 100 years ago, if you compare what was the accepted values and norms, or at least the general mainstream accepted values and norms, would be much more closer to what Muslims believe than what the average liberal or liberalized individual in Britain, non-Muslim Britain, believes. And this is the thing, like, for the majority of British history, the values of Britain actually are closer to Islam than they actually are now. Now it would be considered by the vast majority of the ancestors of the current population of Britain to be obscene and abhorrent in terms of the beliefs and ideas. They would, I mean, if they can see the future, I think they would change course. They do what they can to change course to prevent this reaching that where their descendants, where some of their descendants have gone. But I also think that and this obviously raises the question, which is, who defines British values, as to what basis? Because, as I said, there is no consensus. The polls, what the polls showed when it comes to non-Muslim British people giving the answers, is that there was at least a proportion of them that would say yes to things. Like I pointed out with ISIS, there were a portion of the non-Muslim British public that actually have a positive view of ISIS, and for every single question, there was a portion of the non-Muslim British public that basically said yes or what have you to various questions. And this is where they would agree with Muslims, although in the case of ISIS, actually it was opposite what the majority of Muslims were saying, and opposite in terms of the trajectory. And this is the issue, is that there are a portion of non-Muslims in the West, in Britain, who are British citizens, who don't believe in gay marriage, who think homosexuality should be outlawed. They're not a big majority, but they're there. Are they no longer British? So just to give you an example, outlawing gay marriage was a question. Do you feel that the implementation of the following in the UK, so gay marriage, outlawing it, in the next 20 years would be desirable or undesirable? And so outlawing it, and basically 17% said it was desirable to outlaw gay marriage. So 17% of the non-Muslim British public,
that's nearly 1 in 5 of the population,
believe that it is desirable to outlaw gay marriage. Whereas when asked of Muslims, 29% said it was desirable. 25% said it's not desirable or undesirable. They just because I think there's a discussion amongst Muslims as to, well, what do we say about non-Muslims? Well, like, they can do whatever they want until until if they want to become Muslim, then of course we should follow Islamic laws. But if they're not following Islamic laws because they don't believe in Islam, they don't testify the Shahada, the declaration of faith of Islam, then do what they want. Some Muslims believe that there's a narration of the Prophet Muhammad which said, if you have no shame, do what you want, which also parallels a Greek philosopher as well, actually quite interesting.
Yeah, but you might say that you have Prophet Lut who went to a people, they were Muslims, and he preached to them and called them to repentance. So clearly there's an expectation that they were in the wrong and needed to be brought back to God's way. The Prophet Lot didn't just let them be and just, oh well, they're not part of the Muslim community. I mean, this is another debate, but I think this is an intra-Muslim discussion.
True. There's another poll question, I think, which was outlawing homosexuality. I was asked, like, what do you feel about implementing outlawing of homosexuality?
What are we talking about? Was it outlawing homosexuality? Because this is not obvious.
It's never given. No, it's never. The questions were poorly designed.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that presumably, giving the question the benefit of the doubt, is outlawing the practice of sodomy, perhaps. But it just said outlawing homosexuality.
That means other forms of practice again are illegal. Then, which is a bit absurd. I mean,
it's poorly worded. It's a very poorly worded question. So I mean, I suppose they should have said same-sex sexual relations or same-sex intimacy, perhaps. But anyway, so when asked of Muslims, 27% said that they would desire the outlawing of whatever definition of homosexuality is. But when asked of non-Muslims, yes, a less amount, true, but still 15% of the non-Muslim British public said that they also would view it to be desirable to see the outlawing of homosexuality. Are they not British anymore? Are they not? Because many of them presumably are English, Scottish, and Welsh, what have you. Can they now lose their status as being British now because they had these particular opinions? A typical question that was asked and was brought up a number of times is, would you want to make it illegal to show a picture of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So when asked of Muslims, of course, there was 52% said yes, they would desire to make it illegal. When asked of non-Muslims, yeah, sure, not the same amount, but interestingly, 16% of British non-Muslims.
I really did not expect that result. That's incredible.
Are they not British then anymore? And which brings up the question as to, do you only have a right to contribute to British values or be counted as British values if your ancestry is somewhat linked to the Britannic Isles and Britannia, or for a couple of centuries, perhaps, as long as the Anglo-Saxons have been there as a minimum, or what? Like what the who?
No, I think you put it on the edge. If to be very crude here, if a brown person who is a Muslim has these views, that renders the whole thing very suspicious. If a white person who calls himself a Catholic or conservative evangelical or Orthodox holds those views, then it's just a personal opinion. There's eccentric a personal opinion, and we don't agree with it, of course, but hey, it's their opinion. So I think it's much more than just the opinion, it's who holds it. Their race and their religion makes it very suspect. And so it's not a level playing field here. It's not like, well, I'm a British citizen, I've got a British passport, I'm a Muslim, I'm not a Muslim, I'm a Catholic, I'm white, I'm brown. Therefore we go, no. Are you, what is your ethnic background and what is your religion? When you hold these views, then you're condemned or not, depending on what the religion is. I think there's a hidden matrix here which triggers certain responses in people.
Subtext.
It's a subtext. That's a better word. Matrix, subtext. Exactly.
So going on this poll, there was a question that was asked: women taking a more traditional role in society. Do you feel that the implementation of that in the UK in the next 20 years would be desirable or undesirable? So when asked of Muslims, women taking a more traditional role in society, 40% said it was desirable. And for those of you who want to know, so that desirable is in very desirable, somewhat desirable. The other answers are neither desirable nor undesirable, or somewhat undesirable, very undesirable, or don't know. So these are the other question answers that you can. But I group all the desirables in together. So 40% said it was desirable in some way,
somewhere,
and amongst non-Muslims, 33% said it was also desirable.
Interesting.
Are they again not British anymore?
Again, if they're Catholic or evangelical, yes, they are. If they're Muslim, they're brown, no, they're not.
It's
the subtext, as you put it. Yeah.
Now for the big headliner questions. One of the big headliner questions. Do you feel that the implementation of Sharia in the next 20 years would be desirable or undesirable? So is the implementation of Sharia desirable or undesirable in the next 20 years? So when asked of Muslims, 32% said it is desirable. When asked of non-Muslims, of course, a lesser amount, of course, but still 9% said it was
1 in 10
desirable. Yeah, 1 in 10. Now, again, the point is this: yes, it is less, but is the argument now being made by their side that the Muslim distribution of answers must match exactly the non-Muslim distribution of answers in order to be fully assimilated?
And now we know perhaps why all these questions are kept so vague, to precisely prevent us from looking beneath the bonnet here and asking these difficult questions, because the absurdity of the whole approach is then revealed. Because your question is, well, exactly what you just said. And I think that's a good point.
And just to show you the tactic that they pulled, I can pull that too. So when of those who said it was desirable, as I mentioned, amongst non-Muslims, it was 9%. Yeah. Those who said it was neither desirable nor undesirable, so they basically didn't care either way, it would seem, 16% said that the implementation of Sharia is neither desirable nor undesirable. They didn't go either way. So then, and that leaves only amongst those who said specifically that it was undesirable, 60% said it was undesirable. Now, I could say only 60% of the British non-Muslim population said it was undesirable to have Sharia. That means 40% did not actively oppose it. This is how they worded it against Muslims. So they're not actively opposing Sharia for 40% of the population of Britain. And that just goes to show that this poll is it's as I said, it's all over the place. Like, make of it what you will. You can find anything here you'd like to make a story out of. And there's something else here which I think was quite interesting and wasn't mentioned because I don't feel it fits the narrative. So Muslims were asked, what would you view to be desirable, undesirable, and so on. So if Islam is declared as our national religion. Now, it didn't say as the only national religion. So people could have read it as a national religion. Or it didn't say it would supplant Christianity per se as a religion. But
religions or anything like that. No, it just says should be national religion.
Yeah. So 32% said desirable, and this is where and the rest, those who said it was undesirable was 23%, and the rest either don't know or desirable or undesirable, about around 30%. Now they would say, oh look, there are a portion of Muslims, there are 32% of Muslims that want to have Islam declared as a national religion, even though the question is very ambiguous. Like, what do you mean, for example? Like, just add it to the list of Christianity and then Islam. But what they didn't cite was a question that was asked of Muslims, which is, do you think it's desirable or not desirable to end Christianity's traditional role by removing the Church of England as the established church of the nation? So basically, do you think it's desirable to remove the Church of England as the established church of the nation? And only 14% said that was desirable.
Of what, the public or?
Oh, sorry, Muslims, right?
Oh, only 14%, 1-4.
Yeah, 1-4. Whereas, interestingly, 35% of Muslims said it was undesirable to remove the Church of England as the established church of the state. And GB News didn't cite this because, to show that actually Muslims don't want to remove the Church of England as the established church of the state. Well, we'll get to that in a second. I'm unpacking that. But there's another question as well, following up from that, which was, do you believe, would you like to see more teaching of Christianity in schools? And 23% of Muslims said yes, they would desire that. 39%, so I think by far the majority, said that they neither here nor there for them. And only 23% said that it was explicitly undesirable. And 15% said they don't know. Now, I think what this shows is that when given a choice between a very arid, secular, almost atheistic-based state where there is no morality based on God anywhere in that state, again, versus the alternative, which is some pretense to a morality based on the concept of God, or laws underpinned by morality, underpinned by God as the foundation, at least, even if it's just somewhat of a pretense. Muslims would still prefer that. They would feel more safer in a state that had some Church of England.
In schools in Britain, religious schools, Church of England schools, big Catholic schools are very, very popular. They're oversubscribed, and Muslims send their kids to Catholic schools, not usually because there aren't any good Muslim schools in the neighborhood, but in preference to state schools where there is no official religious allegiance, because they're better schools. They teach morality. They have values, in inverted commas. So I'm not entirely surprised that Muslims would prefer to see the Church of England, continue in that role nationally, because they already, I think many Muslim parents favour Christian schools anyway, because they're better than the secular alternatives. Yeah.
I mean, and this is basically, there's actually still, interesting enough, there's 54% of the non-Muslim public said it was undesirable to see the end of Christianity's traditional role by removing the Church of England from the state. So there was still a majority, but there was actually some amongst Muslims too, even though Christians are now officially, obviously, a minority of the country. I mean, technically speaking, that means that Christianity is no longer part of British values if you're going by majoritarianism, if you're judging it by according to the recent census. So this was just some of the poll questions that was asked. I think there's actually a few more interesting ones that I managed to glean out from looking at the poll. So for those of you who want to know that particular question, so Jewish community leaders in the UK, how much would you say you trust them on the ongoing situation involving Israel and Gaza? So of those who said not very much or not at all, 56%.
Wow.
Of the non-Muslim British public said not very much or not at all, which is where I obviously, as you said, we rebuffed GB News by saying, then is distrusting British community leaders in the UK than British values, part of British values too, because a majority follow that. Of course, they gave no response and no answer to that. So yeah, I mean, these are the kind of the poll results that come out of this. But to go back to something that was mentioned by Nigel Farage himself when he was interviewed by GB News after his comments to Trevor Phillips, the infamous interview, he said that his most worrying concern was that there was a portion of Muslims that believe basically in the concept of jihad, just simply as a concept, not jihad waging war against a particular person.
You just said the word jihad. It was not explained. There's no adjective added to it. There was no context. Just the word jihad, which of course he assumes we all know what it meant. We've all got an informed understanding of what Islam means by jihad. No. Again, that this kind of very superficial jingoistic use of language without any critical analysis of the terms and the different understandings of the term is completely absent from his discourse. And I find that reprehensible, because he's a not unintelligent man, and therefore, if you have intelligence, you have responsibility to use it, and he's refusing to use it when he uses these terms in reference to people of faith.
Yeah, and so to quote the polls, so amongst Muslims that were asked this question, now, as I said, it wasn't. We don't know how they were asked this question. I mean, it's what way they understood the question to ask, what it was they're getting at. But it was asked, and 21% said they have a positive view of jihad. That was simply it. That's it. Just decontextualized, just jihad. For 29%, so the majority basically said neither positive, negative, and you have 28% straight answering negative. Presumably, they answered the question maybe to mean jihad as in how do you think it's portrayed, or whenever it's mentioned, is it in a good or bad light currently? We don't know exactly how they understood it. So if it was, what is your view towards the Islamic concept of jihad, we would have probably got a different answer. Yeah. But looking at obviously non-Muslims, of course there's going to be less of them that will be say it's positive, but there is still some 7% of British non-Muslims say they have a positive view of jihad.
So presumably those have actually bothered to look into it and educate themselves about it.
So 13% don't have a positive or negative view of jihad. So I could then say, using GB News's kind of tactic of way it portrays this, that 20% of the British non-Muslim public do not actively have a negative view of jihad. All right, so at least 20% do not have a negative view of jihad. There are those. There was like 11% said they don't know, and others 6% said they'd never heard of it. So
how many said they'd never heard? 6%.
6%. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, so basically, to unpack that, jihad is in essence what we believe as just war. It is a warfare for justice. It's a warfare to rescue people who are being oppressed. It's a warfare to end nationalistic conflicts, empires. The Pax Islamica was, as I said, it was spread by fighting and pushing back empires and the domination of one ethnic group or one tribe over others, or one type of kingdom over others, and creating a state whereby people were considered to be communities based on their beliefs and ideas, and their beliefs and ideas, they were allowed to live by them autonomously, and they were treated fairly and had equal access to the resources. The resources were not kept for one group. There was no apartheid. There was no walls. You could go anywhere you want, as any religion you want within Islamic lands. Yeah. So jihad is our concept of just war, simple, which is the Western, the concept of just war in the West is basically obviously a correct or right way to engage in war, and in the correct manner, correct method, as well as how you initiate it. But jihad differs from the Western concept of just war. Because there are two things that Islam doesn't believe in, that the Western way of warfare and their philosophers, so liberal philosophers, have justified. One is warfare for colonialism, or the warfare to spread democracy, quote unquote. So Islam doesn't believe that war is engaged in to force, convert, or change the laws of a community or people in a land. So we don't say, well, you're not living according to Sharia, so we're going to conquer your land and force Sharia upon you, and we're going to change how you live and how your laws and so on. Historically speaking, that has been well attested to, the fact that non-Muslim communities They were unchanged. Like where I'm from, Al Andalus, Portugal to be more precise in my case, but Al Andalus is Spain and Portugal. The average non-Christian, Visigothic Christian and others that was living under Muslim rule when the Muslims took over, if absolutely nothing changed. In fact, even the nobles that used to collect taxes from them, the Visigothic nobles, the whole structure remained unchanged. The only difference that happened was that the taxes were reduced because Islamic taxes are less. And they didn't go to the king's private coffers, the Visigothic king, but they went to be distributed by the Muslim administration, including to poor Christians. That's the only thing that changed. Their religion, their laws, that didn't change at all whatsoever. And of course, what actually did change was the level of agriculture improved because of developments. The windmill was introduced by Muslims and so on and so forth. And that led to material improvements for the Christians. Of course, for Jews, it improved significantly because Jews were mistreated by Christians in Visigothic Spain before the Muslims came. And then that was completely removed. And that's why in many cases we see Jews were actively collaborating with the Muslim administration to, for example, be part of garrisons of towns and cities as well. They had all these restrictions upon them lifted that the Christians had put on them prior to. So that's jihad is for opening up a land to the call to Islam. If that land prohibits the call to Islam, it prohibits anyone talking about Islam, or prohibits people from practicing Islam, then the land is to be opened up to allow people the free choice to be Muslim or not. So that's the point of it, in a sense, as well as to fight for justice for those who are being oppressed around the world. And as the verse of the Quran that says, "What is wrong with you? You fight not for the weak and oppressed amongst men, women, and children who call up to God. Our Lord send from you someone who will help and protect us," to paraphrase. And that is not limited to being Muslim or non-Muslims. So non-Muslims can call for Muslims' help, and then we can engage in jihad via an Islamic state and structure, not individually, of course, to go out and help people who are being oppressed and who call to Muslims for help. And so this is, of course, also jihad includes defensive warfare, which people can engage in to defend their lands from an invader coming in. But this is all just warfare. So our key difference is Muslims are not told or commanded to fight for colonial reasons, to impose Sharia upon those who don't believe in it. We are not allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. Secondly, is and by that I mean, stop Christians from eating pork or drinking alcohol, and changing their way of life, basically, because it doesn't conform to Sharia, basically. That's an example. And the second thing that differs from Western warfare is we don't believe in something which is actually mainstream in liberal conceptions of warfare, called the supreme emergency exemption, which is that in an emergency situation where you feel that your nation state or nation is threatened, its political independence is threatened on an existential level, as in that you're going to be invaded and what have you. And if you deem it to be beneficial to your cause of freeing yourself or preventing you from being subjugated or being conquered, to target enemy non-combatants, then the supreme emergency exemption gives you that exemption. That's hence the name, that you can target non-combatants. And the popular example given by liberal philosophers like John Rawls, Michael Walzer. John Rawls is a big fish amongst. He's passed away now, but he's like let's say if you study liberalism, you haven't studied John Rawls, you haven't studied liberalism, basically.
Or John Locke, I would say. But anyway, I'm going to.
yes, of course. But John Rawls is like the you could say
20th century incarnation,
the latest reiteration. He tried to refound liberal values. So the liberal formulas dealing with contentions against liberalism. So he's the go-to guy. I have his book, a couple of his books in the back there. So he basically believed that you can target enemy civilians, and the typical example they bring up is World War II, the targeting of German cities, bombing of Dresden, firebombing of Dresden, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and so on and so forth. And Islam is prohibited, absolutely prohibited, to target non-combatants. You can't target them at all under any circumstances, even if your civilians are being targeted. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawzi, I believe, medieval Islamic scholar, mentioned that very explicitly, that you're not allowed to target enemy non-combatants, even if they are targeting your women and children, and they cause you to be in grief at killing your women and children. You're not you're still not allowed to target enemy non-combatants. So this is an absolute prohibition in Islam, but liberalism allows a supreme emergency exemption. So that's where Islamic way of war and why it wages war is different from liberal conceptions of war. And as I said, people like John Stuart Mill and others justify the use of colonialism as a means to spread liberalism. And of course, it's now known by other names, such as humanitarian interventionism, or the neocons, which is, I'll talk about it as spread democracy by the bullet and the bomb is justifiable. So this is acceptable things to do, whereas for us, no, you can't spread the system of Islam by force upon, as in to impose it upon non-Muslims and change their lives. So anyway, so as Muslims, we should not be ashamed of the Islamic concept of jihad. It is just war done justly. In fact, it is liberals that should be ashamed of the mainstream concepts of the liberal ius in bellum ad bellum and casus bellum. Their justifications for ius en bellum and ius ad bellum. So yeah, which is justice the just means of going to war, as in the just cases to go to war, and justice during war. They're not very just in many, unfortunately. So yeah, what else? There's things like Israel. Do you have a positive view of Israel? Of course, for amongst Muslims, weirdly, 4% of non-Muslims said they have a positive view of Israel. There are then also, I think, just looking at the non-Muslims, it is 21%. Only 21% of non-Muslim British people have a positive view of Israel.
Gosh.
Yeah, 21%. Yeah, I was also like, just to double check that, because in America it's quite different. It's maybe like around the 50%. You know, maybe a bit higher or lower, because of the Republicans tend to have a lot of Christian Zionists there. But in England, only 21% have a positive view of Israel. 32% have neither a positive nor negative view of Israel, and of those who have a negative view of Israel, 32% have a negative view of Israel. So one could then arguably say that the largest faction are those who have a negative view of Israel. That means then that it is British values to have a negative view of Israel. And that's in the same poll. The other thing they cited was Hamas. Sorry, I have to pronounce it correctly. Hamas. Do you have a positive, negative view of Hamas? So yeah, it's true that the poll showed that 29% of Muslims say they have somewhat, in some region, of positive view towards Hamas. 32% said neither positive or negative, and about 24% said negative. But amongst non-Muslims, you still have 8% of non-Muslim British people have a positive view of Hamas. Are they not? So that's still a portion of non-Muslims. If you're going to bring up Muslims, why not also bring up the British non-Muslims too, that also have a positive view of Hamas? 70% said they have neither negative nor positive. Of course, the majority, so about 59%, said that they have a negative view. So my point is this: that yes, there does seem to be overrepresentation of Muslims in terms of the view saying they have a positive view of Hamas. But this is what GB News is citing, and I'm not here to argue about the moral standing of Hamas here at all, just what the facts and stats say. But my only point is that you can still find this. There are a portion of non-Muslim British population, 8%, which say that they also have a positive view of Hamas. So then, are they then also a problem to be dealt with and mentioned by Nigel Farage? Should Nigel Farage have a policy about non-Muslim British people that have a positive view, or is it only an issue if Muslims are the ones that are having it? That's my point.
Yeah, that's my point. It's only an issue if Muslims have it, actually. I think that's the point. There is that subtext, I think. I mean, he's been on record saying he's a big fan of Enoch Powell, who's a very famous nationalist right-wing figure in the past. So I think that we have to take that seriously. He has different views about different groups, ethnic groups of people, and that's the problem.
Yes. Now, on the issue of Hamas committed murder and rape in Israel on October the 7th, there was a majority of people in Britain amongst non-Muslims who said that 62% think they committed murder and rape, although the question is very broad. Like, can't we just separate out who thinks they committed rape, who thinks they committed murder? A better question also is, did Hamas order the murder, or was it just merely committed by the soldiers? And same thing for Israel. Do you think Israel orders murder, genocide, or was it just committed by soldiers as war crimes? So 62% said that they believe Hamas did commit murder and rape in Israel on October the 7th. 8% said that they didn't, but 30% said they don't know.
Right.
So now, to word it in the way that GB News would word it, 38% of the British public did not actively affirm that Hamas committed murder and rape in Israel on October the 7th. Right. Now, again, are they a portion of the non-Muslim British population? Will Nigel Farage have a policy about dealing with them, and how will he decide what's right or wrong, and what was he send a fact-finding mission to Palestine to investigate, or will he accept the UN investigations on the matter? These are questions which are up in the air, of course. Methinks none of the above. He'll just go by what the Israeli state tell him to do. Well, I'm not saying that they do tell him to do anything, of course, or that there are no lobbyists for Israel, behind him. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying, but it's just very interesting. He just seems to be very pro-Israel on it every single time, even though in the discussion with me, he kind of admitted that he doesn't really know much about it. He said that, I don't know, this whole conflict seems to be going back 2,000 years or something. I don't know what's going on, but like, he just didn't know what was really going on. It seemed like he was fed a line to argue, and that's how he's going to argue. That's how he's going to advocate for, which is quite worrying. Which brings up the central question, which is, there are British citizens who are enacting their rights in Britain to protest and demonstrate against immoral actions overseas. It actually makes Britain look good. It makes Britain look a more moral country to have such large numbers of British citizens going out and expressing their opprobrium against the actions of Israel. And yet, Nigel Farage and GB News have been calling for the banning of these demonstrations, the curtailing of the rights of the British citizen to engage in demonstration, protest, and express their opinions on moral issues abroad, for the sake of, some might believe it to be or suspect, a foreign power supporting Nigel Farage. And here's the question now, as you put in your introduction: is he Britain first, as his famous catchline was when he was supporting Brexit, or is he Israel first when it comes to the indigenous rights of the British citizen in this country? I think it's a question that we should also leave up in the air. Perhaps I think I'll leave it to the audience to decide for themselves on that. So yes, and now just to go just a few more questions, then I think we'll end. Sorry, a question on the polls. Sorry, and because there's quite a few questions were asked in the polls. The question was: is Israel committing genocide on Palestinians? 46% of the British public believe that they are.
So it's half the population. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and 33% said they don't know, and only 21% said that it is that they're not committing genocide on the Palestinians. Now, when I debate, sorry, go ahead, sir.
No. I'm just reflecting. I mean, 3/4 of the British population don't agree, basically, that they are or are undecided as to the idea of them committing genocide. That's given the amount of propaganda that comes out from various places. That's a remarkable result, I think.
No, you have to word it in the GB way, News way. You have to say that. What was it called? 79% of the British public are not actively rejecting the claim that Israel is committing genocide on Palestinians. They're not actively rejecting, 79%. Of course, when asked of Muslims, 80% say that they are committing genocide. Only 6% say they're not committing genocide. And 13% say they don't know.
I assume that 6% have been living in a cave since October, and have just only recently come out into the daylight and been asked that question.
Yeah. Now here's the point, which is, I said that Israel's committing genocide. I said it to Nigel Farage's face, and he tried to deny. We don't know that. That's not the case.
I saw that.
And to which I said to him that, well, look, the International Court of Justice is looking into that, and obviously they are saying that there's a plausible case that Israel is actually committing genocide. And I said they've read on it far more than you have. They would have read of it far more than you, and he didn't respond to that. So which is the case here, the majority of the British population, or the most significant majority of the three groups, the don't knows, the ones who reject there's no genocide happening, and those who affirm, the most significant of those who affirm that there is a genocide happening, almost 50% of the population, is that now a British value that to hold, that just to affirm that Israel are genocidal, and of course then the demonstrations which are rejecting that are affirming the British value of being against genocide, reflecting a majority of the population who affirm that a genocide is indeed happening. So this again is something that GB News does not want to engage in, and I think I'll finish up with just again similar questions. Is Israel a racist endeavor? The non-Muslim British public said 28% said yes, 28% said no, and 43% said they don't know. So equal amounts say yes or no, but 43% say actually they don't know on that. Of course, putting it in GB News's way, 71% do not actively reject the proposition that Israel is a racist endeavor. And of course, with Muslims, 72% said yes, 20%, maybe the same that live in the cave, said that they don't know, but 72% said that yes, they did.
Yeah, there's no Wi-Fi in the cave, I think they stated.
Yeah. And I mean, that's about, I think, that's about it. All the things are very, I've covered already. So yes, I've covered it.
There's one poll finding you not mentioned, Abdullah. I was hoping you did mention, but you not mentioned it. And I assume you have come across it, where there's, opprobrium was expressed by GB News, that the idea that there are Muslims who put their religion first over their country. And it always struck me as peculiar accusation, really, because historically Christians have had no problem saying, well, I'm a Christian first, above all things, and then an Englishman second, or whatever, as you can. And that's fairly innocuous. And I'm reminded of the time when Thomas More, he was Chancellor of England under Henry VIII. Henry VIII, of course, separated from the Church of Rome in England, and he sent Thomas More to be executed because he wouldn't agree to the king's divorce. It's all very historical. But the point is, Thomas More, this great English patriot who everyone loves today, is this wonderful martyr for truth. He says, I remain the king's good servant, but God's first. So he protesting his loyalty to the crown, the English crown, but God's first. And that was seen, and that in the hierarchy of truths in life is an entirely appropriate thing to say, that God comes first, except when Muslims say it. And then it's problematic. So again, we come back to the thing that this theological statement that, of course, God comes first because he creates the universe and has our calls for our ultimate allegiance. That's absolutely fine, except when Muslims say that. And this strikes me as inconsistent and incoherent, and it just is very peculiar, actually. And again, because you don't go beneath the surface of dog whistle kind of questions and answers on GB News, you never really get to the grips with these issues. What's wrong with putting God first? Christians say they do, Orthodox Jews say they do, everyone says they do it, but not Muslims. They can't say that. Why not?
Yeah, no, exactly. In fact, because you told me this many years ago, that same phrase about Thomas More.
Thomas More. One of my favourite quotes in British history, actually. I remain the king's good servant. So he made loyal to God, but God's first. So in other words, he has an ultimate allegiance to God, which is entirely correct theologically. You must say that. Otherwise, your religion is worthless, in my view.
Yeah. So, well, what is the famous phrase goes? For God, king, and country. So it's God first, then king, then country, and arguably it's British values to put God first, then over your country, and then your country after that. So yeah, and this is the thing, is that the argument that you actually have some kind of identity or allegiance to a set of moral values, and well, a creating force greater than a peculiar part of the Earth's crust, you could say, that emerged only in the last 1,000, 2,000 years, or over billions of years of the Earth's history, is not a strange thing to have. We all we all hold that the creator universe, and the universe obviously predates Britain, and Britain isn't God, and that's the standard values. In fact, I remember a time a couple of years ago, actually quite a few, maybe over a decade now, actually, the Conservative Party were bringing out I think it was a list of points that were deemed to be extremist. It was called Contest 2. It got leaked by the media. I think it got deliberately leaked to see how it would be taken by the public, and there was absolute outrage. There was members of the Conservative Party who are devout Christians, and in fact, even I believe it was the Archbishop of Canterbury then, which is it Justin Welby at the time,
or the current one, yeah.
Sorry, no, not him. Sorry, another member of the clergy approached, who was part of the Conservative Party, approached Conservative MP and saying, "Look, I believe that God is greater, is more important than the state, and I'm a Christian first and British second. Am I an extremist now?" And I think God just waved away, kind of in a sense, like, "Well, you know who we're talking about here.
Yeah, exactly.
This is not for you guys."
This is one of these slogans that Farage has winced at very, very publicly on GB News. This is Allah Akbar, which, of course, if only to actually look at the meaning of the words, are actually very profound and very beautiful. That God is greater. God is greater than. It's proclaiming the glory of God, the majesty of God, the transcendence of God. This is a very Christian idea as well. It's there in the Christian scriptures, and yet because it's framed in these Arab words, it's scary, but actually it's profoundly theological and a very beautiful expression. And if only the British could understand that and actually own it, because it's good. It's like we used to say, I'll see you tomorrow, God willing. Even as a child, I remember just ordinary English people saying, we don't say it anymore, but Muslims say inshallah all the time, and that's exactly the same meaning, God willing. And so it's Muslims that are keeping this tradition alive, that these old spiritual truths, which used to be part of the Christian world's vocabulary, but have been lost, unfortunately. So I would suggest, even more radically, that the non-Muslim English population should try and learn from Muslims the traditional virtues, the Christian ideas even, of spiritual truths about saying God willing or God is greater, glorifying God. These are things we need to learn from Muslims, actually, and benefit and be grateful that Muslims are in our midst, that they can teach us these things that we have forgotten. So instead of seeing Muslims as a threat, we could see them as a source of blessing and as a source of renewal for our culture. Even if we don't become Muslims, but at least benefit from their treasure, their faith, the Islamic faith. That would be something worth discussing with Farage, actually. I'd like to turn the tables. Instead of being scared of Muslims, actually saying, looking at the blessings, specifically as Muslims, followers of the Islamic religion, that they can bring to Britain, actually, in terms of rejuvenating the culture in a very wholesome, theocentric way. That's like, if I could debate him, I'd say that to him and ask him about his beliefs. Are you a Christian? I mean, do you know, by the way, is he a Christian? Does he claim to be one? Do we know?
I don't know, actually. I mean, I don't think he would deny it, or say he's not a Christian because he wants to appear to be to the major demographic. When Donald Trump said that the Bible was a really great book, I bet he's never read it. And I bet
it's like saying I got a novel. That's a really great book.
Yeah. I mean,
the whole book.
It's haram to gamble, but like if I could do a sportsman's bet with no money put on, I would definitely put non-existent money on the fact that he's probably never read the Bible, Donald Trump. But you see, he said it to appeal to that demographic of voters.
But if Farage says as a Christian, I then say, well, that's great, Farage. So we can. Do you know what Akaba means? Do you know what Inshallah means? Do you know what these Islamic phrases mean? Because they can bring blessing if we actually were to use them ourselves. Maybe not in Arabic, but in English. So we can learn from Muslims. What do you think about that, Farage? Oh.
Well, I once did a debate at Oxford Union, and it wasn't one of the major topics. It was this house would disestablish, would separate church and state, or disestablish the Church of England, and which is that famous, the longest word in English, anti-disestablishmentarianism, right? Yeah. So I was basically arguing actually that for against this establishment versus the secularists, because the choice between having the Church of England, who has biblical values which are are closer to myself as a Muslim, versus secular atheistic values which go all over the place and are capricious and mercurial, historically speaking. Well, I prefer one that's closer to biblical values for non-Muslim government, right? For non-Muslim government, you ask me what non-Muslim government would I prefer? I prefer a Christian non-Muslim government over a secular or a humanistic one, what have you, where its values are much more prone to being intolerant, because they believe that religion is just basically made up fairyland stories, and it will be better for the kids if they're not even taught it, or they have to practice it, what have you. In fact, those who tend to argue against any public manifestation of religion are very secular. They are there's a correlation with intolerance there. Anyway, yes. So at this debate, I made a little bit. I did one of my opening kind of jokes where I said, "Look, you might be wondering what I'm here to talk about today. I'm here to talk about a Middle Eastern religion that came to these shores. That when people convert to that religion, they change their name to Middle Eastern names, and they have beliefs and scripture that comes from the Middle East, and based on by a founder that doesn't speak English. Of course, what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Christianity, and everyone started laughing. So, oh yeah, okay, and they clapped. Like, okay, you got us, right? We thought you were here to talk about Islam, right? But because Christianity is a Middle Eastern religion, well, it's okay. The religions of all the prophets are universal, but by and large, in a sense that all humanity can partake of them. But it's not the religion that originated amongst the Anglo-Saxons or the Celts, also when it came from the Middle East. And when they say, because there was a demonstration in London recently led by Tommy Robinson, and there was they got these kids to say Allah, who is some expletives. Allah, who is this Allah? Like, what is this Middle Eastern language, Middle Eastern name for God? This alien concept of God. Unless we know that God is called this Germanic word, Gott, from Gott, right? That's I'm like I said, if Isa alayhi salam, or Jesus, was here today and he heard the word Allah in Arabic and he heard Gott, he wouldn't recognize Gott. He'd recognize Allah, which is approximate to Eloh or Elahi, which is more likely to what he would have said in his reference to God. And and in essence, my point I was actually going to bring up, if I had more time on the show, I would have said that, look, what makes, why do you think Islam is un-British, right? Because there's a lot of in Islam that was followed by British people for centuries and centuries, and it's much more at home in Britain, historically speaking, than whatever this liberal nightmare you could say that we're living in today, with gender fluidity and with the ideas of gender equality becoming gender identicality. And even these conservative people are complaining about how the traditional marriage has been and family has been destroyed, and so on and so forth, by this confusion and a whole host of other things as well. But I said, look, if you want to have a purely quote unquote indigenous religion, then go back to worshipping Thor, Wodan, and Thriga.
Yeah, paganism.
Yeah, right. I try to get the Anglo-Saxon pronunciation.
I was very impressed. Extremely impressed at your homework because I just use the old modern pronunciation, the authentic one. No, the worship Odin and the Norse gods or whatever it is we used to worship before. It was Augustine came from Rome in the 5th century and brought Christianity to the pagans in England. Not that England existed then, but that's not the subject. Absolutely. How far back do you go?
I mean, Anglo-Saxons literally they didn't call Odin, they called him Wodan, and we have Thursday, Thursday, Friday, Friga from Friga. So these are actually Anglo-Saxon imports into England, right? These are where these come from, and so this is where basically my point is that why if you've already accepted a Middle Eastern religion and it comes from a founder, quote unquote, who spoke a Middle Eastern language, then you need to accept that just because something is of a different language doesn't mean that the values are alien, because you've already done that. You've already accepted a religion.
A brown-skinned, Aramaic-speaking Palestinian Jew from 2,000 years ago who didn't know a word of English, funnily enough, and he certainly didn't support liberal democracy as far as the Gospels are concerned. And yet Christians worship this guy. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but they do. And he's definitely not a candidate really for the kind of wholesome Christian that Farage would like us to be. Really, very, very different. And Aramaic, the language of Jesus, is very similar to Arabic. They're both cognate Semitic languages. So
So I think we'll really finish up with that. The last kind of session I did at GB News, I was invited to do a debate with an individual who was I suppose ostensibly meant to be a historian, guy called Rabbi Heidel Manku. So say that 5 times fast.
I'm not going to try.
So he's brought on by GB News. He's expressed some, in my opinion, very strong Islamophobic opinions and ideas. The way he was speaking about the Muslim community, I think is if you just simply change the words with Jews instead of Muslims in the phrases he's used, you would easily see that he was being anti-Semitic. But so I was kind of faced up with him, and it was discussing Nigel Farage's comments. Now, I want to let you into something that perhaps most people didn't know just yet, or haven't really announced it just yet. Basically, so I came for that show on the 27th of May. This was the day after Nigel Farage's interview with Trevor Phillips, and I was in the green room of GB News waiting to go on.
Can I just pause you there? Is it really green, or is that just a word that's used? I mean, is it actually the color green?
Actually, not really. But I don't know why it's called the green room, but that's what it's called. The waiting holding cell.
The waiting holding cell. That's a better word.
You're corralled out as cattle into
I'm just dying to ask someone who's in one of these green rooms if it was green, but apparently not.
No, apparently not. So I was waiting in the green room, and I was basically I was there with a member from the People's Workers Party or something like this. Was I think George Galloway's party. Was there. Some representative was there, but and I was watching the computer screen, which was a TV screen, which was showing the current show that was being aired. And apparently Nigel Farage was literally on just before me. He was actually in the studio being interviewed on his own show, but obviously being interviewed by not a presenter, standing presenter. And on this show, I couldn't really hear much of it because I was talking to other guy at the same time, but I was trying to listen to him and what he was saying. And Nigel Farage, where he repeated things like he's saying that he was concerned that there is a proportion of young British Muslims who believe in jihad, and this was an issue because I think the host said this shows that if it's younger British Muslims are more likely to believe these ideas than older ones. This, where you could have excused conservative Muslims of the past, older generations for having such beliefs, but to show that they are still persisting and increasing amongst the younger generation, this is the problem. Because I was like, wait, first of all, like for myself, wait a second. So, when people came to England and Britain as immigrants, and they were told, okay, well, here's the laws of England, and like you can work and obey the laws, but you're free to have your beliefs and practice your religion. So they were told this, and there was no one told them, oh, by the way, it's only on the condition that you make sure that your kids no longer have these beliefs that you do, right? Or have more beliefs than you do. Sorry, you're only allowed here on this condition. No one said that to them, right? So that was interesting that it was only acceptable for the older generation to have what is called conservative Muslim beliefs, but not the younger generation. I just found that weird and strange. Anyway, so and on this program, Nigel Farage was told that the representative of the Muslim Council of Britain, I think it was Zahra Mohammed, I believe, that she condemned his statements as Islamophobic and race baiting, because in essence, he wouldn't say the same things about people that were basically English or Welsh or indigenously Welsh, Scottish, or English. But because the Muslims are believing these things, and they tend to be immigrants or the children of immigrants, that's why he's using this. And he said that he's happy to have a debate with Zahra Mohammed on a panel about these points. And then it put down in the banner on the TV that he challenges the Muslim Council of Britain to a debate. So I'm like, well, I'm part of the Muslim Debate Initiative, and I do debates.
And you're in the green room next door to where he's.
I'm in the green room next door to him. So, so as I was ushered in, as the show was about to begin, and he was just finishing up, and then his show stopped, and as he was coming out, I came up to him and I thought, okay, I'm going to be very polite, so that he can use no excuse to back out of this. I said, look, I said, hi, Nigel. You remember me? I've been on your show, speaking with you, twice before, so you know me.
Oh yes.
You can't say, so he doesn't. Oh, who are you? I don't know who you are. No, I've actually been on his show twice. Well, I heard you challenge the Muslim Council of Britain to a debate. I tell you what, I'm part of Muslim Debate Initiative. We do debates. How about debate us? So he said, oh yes, of course, yes, that's a great idea, great idea.
This was recorded. I've seen it actually on YouTube. So this is recorded. He definitely said it.
I'm at the GB studios, about to go on discuss Nigel Farage's comments. It's the Nigel Farage. Yes. I'm Abdullah Al Andalusi. I've been on this show twice.
Rafe, how are you?
You made a debate challenge to the Muslim Council of Britain.
Yeah.
Well, my organisation, the Muslim Debate Initiative, we'd be happy to take you up on that challenge if you'd be interested.
You sound like the right people then.
Yes, indeed.
Good.
If you'd be interested, let's do that.
Are we very interested? I mean, I think we need to talk about some of this stuff badly, actually.
Yeah. All right. No problem.
You captured it on camera, so there you go.
He kind of like, yeah, of course, yes. And then as he was like walking out, briskly, so he didn't say no to it. And then I think the host said, "Oh, you got it on camera, so he can't back out of it actually," because I was filming it at the time. So I thought I'll challenge him to a debate. Then let him debate with me, and let's see if he's going to honor that. Now, whether he will actually honor that or not, I don't know. But I think I will probably put that video on in public and make it clear that I didn't approach him rudely or brashly. He made a claim that he's happy to debate Muslim Council of Britain. Well, guess what? I'll debate him, and he knows me. And I was literally coming onto his show just after him, of course. Well, there was a stand-in, of course, but I was coming onto his own show, so he can't say, "Who are you?" Well, you met me 3 times now, right? on your program.
No, I'm sure MCB were happy to stand aside for an experienced debater like yourself.
Well, yeah. Hope. I mean, inshallah, let's see if that goes ahead. So everybody, please put pressure on Nigel Farage to put his money where his mouth is.
I'll give him a call now. No worries. that was a joke, by the way. I don't have him on my speed dial. Okay.
Yeah. Different parts of London now. Oh, you're from. Anyway, so but basically, I was on this show, and this guy called Rabbi was brought on, and the host brought up again the issue of the poll that was commissioned by Henry Jackson Society, that same poll we've just been discussing this whole episode, saying that British Muslims don't believe Hamas committed rape or murder. A proportion of younger British Muslims believe this, and yada, and so on and so forth. They went through a whole scattergun of points, well, as I said, Muslims want to ban the showing an image of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it's like, and to which I said, look, these opinions and beliefs if you ask any religious Christian, would you want to ban? Would you want to see an end to making a depiction of Jesus and having it mocked and insulted in the worst viable way? Remember that art piece? I use art in the most loosest possible term possible. Where they put a crucifix with a alleged depiction of Jesus on it into a vat of urine. Right now, while as I said, as Muslims, we don't believe in crosses. We don't believe in any depiction of the prophets. So obviously, for us, that's a big no-go. But we can appreciate that claiming that this image represents Jesus and then putting him into a vat, putting this image into a vat of urine is not a respectable way, putting it lightly and mildly, of viewing and respecting Jesus or Isa alayhi salam. So I think many Christians would say, yeah, I'd like to see that banned. Christians protested against that at that time. They were in England. They were against this. So I put the point that, look, all these are things that you point out. Many of these religious opinions, they're just opinions of people they're just religious beliefs and convictions of people who believe in a religion. And I put to them that basically, if you say that England has, liberal, free values and blah, blah, then we should have the right to believe in these values and beliefs and hold them without being discriminated against for them, as long as we don't break the law by physically attacking people or forcing people to convert to Islam or what have you, or like shutting down pubs. Well, the pubs are shutting down by themselves because of.
Well, they are. They're doing it themselves. We don't need to have any of our intervention.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So, and you mentioned some statistics that would seem to be very just like crazy, like 9% of Muslims. And then he said, like, if you kind of proportion that to the Muslim population of England, 400,000 people identify as being Islamists and supporters of terrorism. I don't know of where in the survey.
Well, I was so disappointed because, I mean, I happen to know, having looked into it a little bit, that the word Islamist is highly controversial and no one agrees with what it means anyway. It's not as if there's a clear scientific definition. So to bandying this word around, as if it has any meaning in the first place, is begging the question. And, without getting into it, it struck me as a really shoddy piece of journalism.
Yeah. And the guy called this so-called historian guy, he brought up statistics like 31% of British Muslims say that America was behind 9/11. Well, I remember at one point, 25% of Americans believe America was behind 9/11 too.
Yeah, let alone the assassination of JFK, and I believe the CIA was behind that. This is pretty normal in mainstream America.
Yeah, I mean, conspiracy theories have significant devotees and votaries amongst British people, Americans, Canadians, whoever. Like, the conspiracy theories are known as conspiracy theories because significant portions of people believe in them. And
I was shocked a year or two ago when I didn't realize that people actually believe that we never went to the moon, and I thought, you can't be serious. And they looked at the stats, like huge numbers of people in Europe and America don't actually believe we went to the moon. I think, good grief, I never. So yeah, that's a conspiracy theory, obviously, because NASA made it all up and governments colluded and whatnot.
Yeah, it's when Hollywood had better graphics, better CGI, and so on. Yeah. in the 60s and so like, as I said, conspiracy theories are a well-known thing within Western societies. The currents of conspiracy believers are well known in the West. You could argue that this is very much a part of the British values in terms of what is acceptable discourse is to be believing conspiracy theories, because there are proportions of Britain and America and Canada and so on who believe in conspiracy theories such that they become mainstream, that everyone knows about them, everyone knows and talks about them. And they argued and debated now. I
was in Dallas, Texas recently, and I learned that most Americans now, and since the assassination, do not believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. That's a conspiracy theory, and that is mainstream.
Yeah. Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. The multiple shooters theory and so on and so forth. Yeah. and then so you mentioned all these scattergun all these points. So I made some responses that I could, although it was so much I couldn't respond to all of them, and a lot of these polls we now really looked into. So it then came to the point they said 81% of Muslims identify as Muslim first and British second. So, and he said that in Germany it was only 66%, and in France it was only 46%. Which, I mean, for me that's concerning, because 100% of Muslims should say, "I'm Muslim first, and I'm British, German, French."
That's what Muslim
Egyptian.
means. God, I mean, if not,
yeah. So, and of course, no one does a poll on Jews and Christians who might give similar responses. And so I pointed out something that people don't. Because currently now in Britain there's a discussion as to having conscription, people becoming reservists in the British Army, young people and so on and so forth, with the threat of Russia somewhere, I don't know, nearby or something, coming, British shores. So I said, okay, well, in the Gazan, in the suppression and bombardment of Gaza by the state of occupation force of Israel, the significant portion of people who were British Jews went to Israel to serve as reservists. These same people are not British reservists. So I pointed out that why don't, if this is allowable to you, and in the previous discussions I've in other episodes they've mentioned Muslims be more willing to go to Syria than serve in the British Army. In the past, I've been engaged in those kind of debates. Maybe not with GB News, before GB News' time, but I've engaged when there was the uprising against a tyrant ruler, of course, Bashar al-Assad. Then I said, okay, then why don't you say that that's a problem? Right? You would never question their patriotism. You never say that their Britishness is suspect because they would be reservists for a foreign country, but they would not be reservists for Britain, or they do not serve in the British reserves, right? So again, they just didn't want. And then Rafi made this very cheap response. He says this: I don't recall Jews blowing themselves up. I don't recall Jews beheading anybody, and I don't recall Jews flying planes into buildings. To which I then said, well, when before the state of Israel was created, Zionists, because Jews here is not the issue, but Zionists actively engaged in terror attacks against killing British politicians outside of Britain, so outside of Palestine, killing British civilians, non-combatants, blowing up hotels, heck, even blowing up other Jews, like the ship, the Patria, was a ship of Jewish refugees that Britain turned around, saying from Palestine, and just to make a point, Zionist forces blew up the ship, killing almost all the Jews on board, of Jewish refugees. Right, so they set up they were bombing marketplaces. They were bombing and killing and had targeted assassinations of British politicians. And to which the host said, "Well, let's keep it in the here and now and not dredge up history."
Talk about genocide then, shall we?
Yeah, I said, I'm sorry, the 9/11, that's 23 years ago, right? That you can dredge that up, right? But when Zionists in the past have seen that you go against Britain, if Britain stands in the way as an obstacle to their objectives, they will kill British politicians, British people, British civilians, British judges, and of course British soldiers, and destroyed civilian targets, right? And they were funding this internationally. They had international support for the Irgun. There was a movie starring Marlon Brando, actually, with fundraising for the Irgun, a terrorist organization in America, right? You had this organization called the American Association for a Free Palestine. And no, that's not what Free Palestine, is that genocidal? No, this was actually a Irgun kind of fundraising organization in America that was fundraising to basically fight the British and kill British people in order to evict them from Palestine. So this is where yes, there is terror, and of course there's been terror attacks on Palestinians, and I'm talking about not just the Israeli army, because that's a whole bunch of terrorism. I mean, that's dropping bombs. That's like 70,000 tons of bombs dropped on the Gaza, more than all the German cities combined, apparently, in World War II. Some people did a study on this. Really shocking. But even just actual terrorism by Zionists who are meant to be who are not soldiers per se, Hebron massacre, gunning down Muslims in a mosque, setting fire to mosques and killing people. There is active terrorism going on, right? And because he mentioned 9/11, I mean 9/11 happens in America, it's not in England, right? So he's mentioning international. So I wasn't allowed to respond to that, but I mentioned as soon as I brought some points up, they said don't dredge up history. So we're all dredging up history now. I could use your tactic against you, that Zionists have been responsible for terrorism. And they mentioned the killing of David Amos, the MP, stabbing by a British Somali individual whose motives were unclear. They alleged he supports ISIS, although he didn't say himself that he supports ISIS, but they alleged accepting that as a fact. No one mentions the killer of Joe Cox, the first MP to be killed, you could say, for political reasons in recent times, who was killed by someone saying Britain first, the slogan of Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage's slogan, shouting his slogan, right? If he says we should ban, saying Allahu Akbar because it's associated with terrorism, which I've been on the GB News show that one of the interlocutors said that, I said, okay, then you should also ban saying Britain first as well, because that's been associated with terrorism. So these are the things which, they didn't want to mention, and they didn't want to also mention that he mentioned that Muslims live in silos. And I said, well, would you dare say that about Golders Green or Stamford Hill, that they're living in silos? They even have their own police kind of force, called the Shomrim, for example. Would you say that? So of course they wouldn't say that. And this brings me to, I think, my final point of this, which is, and something I think which is quite shocking and concerning, which is I noticed in the comments people saying, well, look, the reason that these were probably people that agreed with Nigel Farage and others, and they were saying they agree with Nigel Farage. They say, don't compare the treatment of Jews to treatment of Muslims. Muslims are by far a greater proportion of the population of Britain than Jews are. Right, that was what the constant response I was seeing in the comment section, and I was like, "That's very worrying. That's very concerning." So you're saying that if they were a greater population of the people in Britain, then you would treat them as you're treating Muslims. It's just purely because they're a smaller minority. That's it, right? And this reminded me of something which, because I've been trying to make a lot of comparisons in history, seeing similar rises of anti-minority thinking in history, and I know everyone cites the Nazis and others for arguments to make comparisons, but I think this one is quite interesting because it's quite chilling, and there's a parallel. So on the 28th of July 1922. Hitler gave a speech called Freedom or Slavery. And this was to the German people saying, do you want to be free or do you want to be slaves to, Jews and the foreign governments and so on and so forth. And he said this. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you can check it out for yourself. He said that the reason in England that he said Jews go unnoticed and then they're not, their machinations, quote unquote, unthwarted, quote unquote, so to speak, in England, and this is all false allegations by him, of course, but this is how he's arguing. He says because Jews are a much smaller population amongst the English people, so they're not noticed. But in Germany, they are a greater population, and Germans see them. See them much more, and therefore notice what they're doing, quote unquote, whatever he's alleging they are doing. Right, take over and undermine and take over the state and leverage the government and all this whatever stuff he was trying to allege. And this is a chilling argument because he argued that it was only because Jews were a smaller minority in Britain that they weren't noticed and dealt with as in the way that he wants to deal with them. But if they were in England, English people would have dealt with them the same way that he wants to deal with them in Germany, and they would notice what Jews are doing as Germans are noticing what Jews are doing, quote unquote, whatever he claimed they are noticing, and that's worrying, right? And that's scary, basically. And just so you understand, although Muslims are So Jews in Germany, in Berlin, in 1933, were about 3.7% of the population of Berlin. Muslims in the UK currently are 6%, right, of the population. So this is the kind of worrying thing, I'm seeing, and it's something that we all have to bear sober pause for thought on, concerning on the direction of Nigel Farage's rhetoric. And I think just the final points that was typical tropes were mentioned on the show about Muslim rape gang in north of England and what have you. Rabbi claimed, and he said this: industrial scale rape of British girls by Pakistani Muslims. Industrial scale, right? This is inflammatory exaggeration. I mean, yes, there are people. There are Pakistani, or let's say Pakistani. They're just incidentally Pakistani networks, small groups of people. Most of them tend to be Pakistani in these identified cases. Yes, but there are vast majority of cases, of course, are what are called white British pedophile networks that tend to target much younger children. In essence, in the West, in England, and again, no one talks about that. No one talks about Gary Glitter, great British icon, right? When he was discovered for what he was doing to young kids. Anyway, I wrote an article, so we'll put it on hopefully in the references section or some description section. I looked into the statistics about so-called Asian grooming gangs and what actually was really going on. And looking at the statistics to show that actually they're not disproportionate to the population of Asians in England vis-a-vis other populations. They're not overrepresented, basically. So that's also, I think, a false claim. They also mentioned silly things like England's like the center of acid attacks in the global center of acid attacks. To which I mentioned that that's quite funny then, because in the world, there's Muslim countries. It's like 50 plus Muslim countries. And so if they're not the center of acid attacks, but England is, then it's got nothing to do with Muslims or Islam then. And I think as the final point I said in that program, and this really kind of, I think, encapsulates my point against GB News and Nigel Farage, was that the host said that he was at the demonstration in Parliament Square where the Palestine demonstrators were putting up a sign via a light strobing and whatever you laser, saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and they put it up on Big Ben. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And he said he was pleading with the police, take it down. To which I said, well, that's what's wrong? What was wrong with it? He said, I find it grossly offensive. I say then, well, freedom of speech is to say things despite other people finding them grossly offensive. Looks like you guys are against British values. And he started laughing uncomfortably because I like, oh, you kind of caught us there. And that's the thing, is that I ended with that question, is Nigel Farage for the rights of British people, putting Britain first, or is he putting other countries' agendas first by curtailing the rights of British people? And I would add another question to that, which is, and by instigating internecine sectarian and ethnic strife in UK for the behest of agendas of Zionists who want to disrupt criticism against Israel by causing internal strife, it seems, within Western countries to disrupt that criticism, those movements that are criticizing them. So I think these are questions I think we have to raise, serious questions with Nigel Farage. And if Nigel Farage has the courage of his convictions, he will face me, sir, on the field of debate.
Yes. That would be a debate to behold. Absolutely. And I look forward to watching it. Inshallah, that he has the courage of his convictions, as you say, to actually do it. So, but in the meantime, thank you very much, Abdullah, for your time and your fascinating stories and your forensic analysis of all sorts of things. It's been extremely beneficial, very entertaining as well. In a good way, and so thank you very much indeed, Abdullah. Until next time.
Barakallahu feekum. Thank you. Inshallah.